Hey everybody, and welcome to Let's Look at Circa Infinity by Kenny Sun. This is not a video game, it is a book. I'm going to read from it. It's 481 pages long. Let's get started. No, it's actually, as you might expect, given that you're watching a gaming channel on YouTube right now. This is indeed one of those newfangled digital video games. It just came out on Steam earlier this week, and I played a little bit of this at PAX, actually, but I played about 45 minutes in the comfort of my own home as well, so I understand what's going on here. It is this is gonna sound like I mean this as an insult, but I don't mean it as an insult. It is a gimmick-driven arcade puzzle platformer, might be the way that I would describe it. It's not a physics-based puzzle platformer like Vessel or, you know, even Braid or something like that. I guess it's not that physics-based. World of Goo, you know, stuff like that. It's much more like, imagine single-screen VVVVVV. It's sort of like that is the best way I can describe it. It's $10 American on Steam. And there's a little bit of a narrative thing going on as well here. Let's start with level select. Everything in the game is done radially, if that makes sense. So I am using a 360 controller here, but you could just as easily use the arrow keys, or I wonder if it has WASD controls. I'm not totally sure. The gimmick of the game is extremely simple, and because it's relatively fast, we should be able to play through maybe all of World 1 over the course of this video. Basically, you are this character that runs around the outside of a radius, or a circle here. When you press the A button, you jump into the middle, and your goal is basically just to follow these concentric circles in. So each kind of one has its gimmick. When you're on the outside of a circle, the way you get in is by going into that like pizza pie area there. Otherwise, when you're on the inside of a circle, the way you get into the next level is by just jumping into the circle, and if you glance it, you'll make your way in. And there's a little bit of like a score attacky thing going on here. The first levels here are going to start off being very simple, and also because I've already put in the time to figure out what the, you know, I've learned the skills, let's put it this way, to get through the first world. It should be relatively easy. As you might expect, those enemies do hurt us, so we have to do our best to jump over top of them, and we put down a pretty good time here. Might look really easy so far, and to be honest with you, I'll just kill myself to show what happens when you die. You move back one circle, but to be honest with you, it does start out pretty easy, especially once you kind of get the gimmick. I guess I should say, before we get too far into this, consider yourself forewarned when it comes to seizure warnings and stuff like that. If you're photosensitive, you should definitely, you know, exercise caution when watching this video, or maybe even skip it, as much as I hate to say that. But, you know, you want to be on the careful side. There will be flashing lights and stuff like that. Another game that is kind of a good analog to this would be Super Hexagon. So Super Hexagon, you know, again, single screen, kind of puzzly, not really platformy, but very similar elements, because this game is going to get to the point where it almost becomes bullet hell, only it's not really bullet hell, it's just like enemy hell, and sometimes just actual hell, as you'll see as we move along here. But right now, I'm just going to try to put down some good times and hopefully get through these without having any deaths as well, even though I did have a death on the last run. I don't know if there's an achievement involved, but you might have seen me unlock an achievement a little earlier. For beating part 1. I don't know. I've already beaten part 1 and gotten midway through part 2, and maybe achievements weren't working in the beta that I was using. Every game that I get on Steam now is like this for beta testing, and I never know if it's actually gonna transition to the full release, but it always does. Anyway, another thing that's a defining element of the game, and I feel the need to mention this when we get started here, because it might not come across that well in videos, is there is a driving soundtrack, which is another thing that's kind of analogous to Super Hexagon. You know, Super Hexagon was a game that had strong fundamentals and cool mechanics, but also was driven by that kind of cool soundtrack that gave the game a lot of its flavor and addictiveness as well, and made it, you know, extremely replayable. Man, so much for 0 deaths. Anyway, there's a lot of that going on here, and it's the same track over the course of the entire world, then a different track for each boss battle. And, you know, it's kind of a mark usually of a game with a good soundtrack when the soundtrack is available for sale separately on Steam, and that is indeed the case here. And it's one of those games that comes with, you know, you can buy the game for itself for $9 during this opening week sale, $10 when it's actually, you know, been more than a week since it came out, or you can get it in the deluxe edition for like $15 with the soundtrack as well, and the soundtrack is like $7 or $8 standalone. A little pricey, and to be honest with you, one of the minor complaints I have about the game is that, oh, don't go that way. I do think, and this is a little bit presumptuous of me, by the way, these levels kind of function as a checkpoint, which I think is a little bit of ingenious design. Basically, they create like 2 consecutive levels with nothing in them, so when you get sucked back one level, you just go back to the checkpoint. But, or you go back to a level that's almost unlosable, shall we say. But I do think that maybe it's my 2011 roots talking, But it feels more like a $5 game to me. It's such a minor complaint that I hesitate to even bring it up, and $10 very much is the new normal when it comes to games like this, but I remember when games like this used to be $3 or $5 on Steam, and I do feel that's a little bit more of an appropriate price point for a game that seems relatively short, definitely under 3 or 4 hours long, and kind of one note, and I know that sounds very offensive. I don't mean it in an offensive way necessarily, but simplistic, minimalistic, let's put it that way. Minimalistic is more along the lines of what I'm going for. But I'm not a biz dev person, so I don't know if that's a appropriate targeting or not. I'm just rendering my opinion. What's really one of the strengths of the game is that you do get introduced to new mechanics very, very quickly, and they're introduced in a novel way. We're kind of speeding through it here to the point where we're not really getting much of a chance to talk about it. But trust me when I say that when we get down into the later levels, you'll get more of a chance to see as I die probably over and over and over. We're being introduced to enemies here who kind of phase out, and really what they're doing now is teaching us... Oh, that was bad. Teaching us, like, the language of the game, or the syntax, and we'll be using that language and syntax to kind of... I don't want to say construct our own sentences because that sounds way more high-minded than I mean, but to navigate future levels. You know we have these enemies that phase in and out between the planes, and you'll see them do that here. And now we've learned, hey, we have a little bit of a period of invincibility when they do that, where we can transition between our planes, and we're starting to get into some inventive levels here. And that's really one of the things that the game does extremely well, is that, you know, teaching without teaching. I really thought we could thread the needle there. It's kind of like a buzzword, I think. The first time I ever heard it was in that Ego Raptor sequelitis video for... That was very bad of me. For Mega Man X, is like, you know... Some games need a tutorial. This game does a very good job of not really giving you a tutorial and instead just being like, okay, we're going to incrementally introduce enemies, and those enemies are going to do their thing. You're going to observe and figure out how to get past them, and then we're going to iterate on that. We're going to give you like harder and harder combinations, and then we're going to throw in a novel enemy, and then we're going to mix up that enemy, or mix that enemy in with combinations of the new or the old enemies that you've already mastered, so that you kind of understand the incremental process of how to get through this. It's a very satisfying way of progressing in the game, for sure. So we're getting into some levels that are a little bit more difficult here, but in the interest of maybe expediting things a little bit, maybe we'll go back to the home screen and go to level select and go to level 1, and maybe mix it up and go straight to level... Oh, sometimes I get a little confused with the radial controls here. We'll go straight to level 9, and then we'll try to do like 9, 10 boss, and then we'll move on to the second world so you can see how things go. So this enemy is one of the most hellish, even though it doesn't look like it, you know? At first you see this guy and you're like, he doesn't move. This is not bad at all. Then you realize, I'll try it here, you actually can't jump over him. So that becomes a real problem, and that's another thing I like about the game. Sorry, a little bit of mouth flatulence there to be as gross as possible. You also can't move between them on that plane like that, so I made a mistake there, and that was a mistake that I made thinking I wasn't going to make that mistake anyway. But check that out. You can do a little bounce past him, and you can jump. You don't get any air on the jump, but you can still get the locomotion to move past him. You get like that brief period of kind of being low enough that it doesn't matter. The game plays with a lot of axes, if that makes sense, like a lot of spectrums. There's not just the spectrum of like jump over enemies that are coming for you, and you know, of course, as you might expect, there's enemies that only move when you move, and there's enemies that, you know, only move when you're in the air, and then there's enemies that stop moving when you're in the air and stuff like that. But then there's also enemies that, you know, move in opposite directions to one another, and then there's enemies like this that sometimes don't move at all, but impede your ability to actually make a jump. Managed to make it through that time. And the game really starts to play with that stuff really quickly. You know, it only takes 15 or 20 minutes before you get into that point. And probably the best thing that I can say about the game is that it really does a good job of not letting itself exclusively be defined by its gimmicky nature, if that makes sense. And gimmicks are used as insults. Like, the word itself is used as an insult a lot of the time. I don't at all mean it as an insult. Every game, for the most part, and every successful game has some sort of gimmick, you know? Papers, Please has the visual style and kind of like surprisingly, I'm not trying to use this as my own personal soapbox, but you know, Papers, Please has its own you know, unique visual style, and also the hook of playing this like really boring job that actually turns out to be a lot of fun in the actual gameplay itself. These enemies jump, so we can navigate around them accordingly, as you might expect. And then we gotta wait for those guys to flip, and then we'll just keep going here, and there we go. I'm trying to think of some other games. You know, Rogue Legacy is basically like a roguelike applied with the Castlevania formula. 20XX is pretty much that exact same thing. It's coming out soon anyway. There'll be a video on it. It's pretty much exactly the same thing, but with the Mega Man formula applied instead of the Castlevania formula. That was a bad jump on my part there. So I don't mean to imply that gimmicks are a bad thing at all. But what I was going to say is that I think the game's principal strength is that its gimmick doesn't wholly define it. Like, it does a great job of kind of getting more mileage out of this gimmick than you would expect. It reminds me a lot of VV in that respect. That might have been like 7 Vs, but you know what I'm talking about anyway. V to the 6. We can make it here. It doesn't necessarily hit the same highs for me as VVV. I wonder why it's... maybe Terry Kavanagh games are a huge influence on this, as you might expect. I seem to keep referencing these games. I didn't even think about that until now, but... VVV is a little bit stronger for me just because I like the story elements of it. This is our boss fight. The boss fights are actually fun, and at least the first one I've played so far here is quite difficult as well. We have to wait till he cries, and then we get in between his 2 tiers, and that allows us to hit him there. And of course, he gets more difficult as time goes on. Standard, like 3 hits, he dead applies here. I think we might just kill him right now. That was surprisingly good, and this is where you should look away if you have photosensitive epilepsy. But anyway, yeah, it doesn't fully let itself continue to look away, by the way, if you're sensitive about that stuff. It doesn't let itself be defined by its gimmick. It does a great job of iterating on it. VVV obviously has story elements, and I enjoy the Metroidvania type aspect of that, and it plays with design quirks, or like its relatively rudimentary design gimmick a lot as well to make something that's more than the sum of its parts. And I think there's a lot of that in this as well. I don't know if it's as successful or at least as accessible. But it kind of hits different notes for me. This, to me, seems like a little bit more of a time attack and score attacky platformer. Not score attack, I guess, time attack. But and it's got that super hexagon thing going on as well. It's not a game that's going to be for everybody, but provided you're okay with the budgetary caveat here, I've actually had quite a lot of fun with it, and it's extremely playable. Like, time has gone by very quickly as I've been playing it. And in a way, I was talking to some other people about this, but it kind of harkens back to an earlier day. It's weird to be nostalgic about this. And I remember back in, like, 2010, 2011, 2012, every second indie game, at least, that was coming out on Steam was, like, not necessarily minimalist, but a platformer or a puzzle platformer. And I kind of miss those times a little bit. I mean, there's a lot that's not missable about those times. Not all those games were particularly strong. There were a lot of, I don't want to say half-assed, because that implies like a lack of effort, but there were a lot of like half-successful, collect-a-thon type games and Super Meat Boy inspired, I don't want to say rip-offs. That was not what I meant to do there. But not every game from that era is successful, but the ones that were a lot of fun, and this is one that I think fits in pretty squarely with them. This one is largely a success, and we made it. Again, it's not recommendable to everybody. It is something that I could totally see people watching this video and being like, oh, this should be free on Newgrounds or something like that. But that era has passed as well. You can be nostalgic about that era if you want, but we're well past that era for sure. And as much as I think $10 is maybe a little bit audacious, without being rude, I do think that this is a game that, if you can justify that, you're going to have a good time for it. I try to mostly avoid talking about game prices and instead focus, 90% on, is this game fun? Because, with Steam the way it is now, you can find games that are originally, $60 on for $250 like a year later. So it's not always a relevant concern all the time. The bigger concern is the game fun? Is it worth your time? I think it is worth your time. And if you can, find the opportunity later to get it even cheaper, then and you can justify that, then more power to you, I suppose. And you can see it gets pretty ridiculous pretty quickly. I'm hoping to get into some new levels soon. I went a little too far there. I'm hoping to get into some new levels soon, because in a way I'm kind of cheating, because I've already played these levels. I've learned what I would deem the necessary skills to succeed here. Like, I've already done these obstacles and bashed my head against the wall a few dozen times here to try to make these work. I'm hoping that we can get to some new stuff so you can see me try to, engage in the process of learning, because that's really where we're going to see the iteration stuff come in here, and then the quote-unquote teaching without teaching stuff, which I do think the game does extremely well. It reminds me a lot of Duet. I don't know how many people played Duet. It was pretty popular. It is pretty popular on on iOS at least. But basically it was a game that was kind of like, oh, now I'm like, what the heck? Pivot, that's the game, where you basically avoided these freaking Sonic the Hedgehogs, man. I have played this level, as embarrassing as that is. You basically pivoted to avoid obstacles. That's pretty much what Duet was. Duet did a great job of kind of introducing elements on the fly, as did Pivot, for example, as well. This game kind of fits squarely in between there. Duet is another reasonable analog. If you enjoy games like that, you'd probably enjoy this as well. Now, there we go. Obviously, if you haven't figured it out, the Sonic the Hedgehog gimmick is that when you are on the ground, he moves in the direction that he's facing, which is important. And when you're in the air, he doesn't move at all. So you can kind of manipulate their positioning a little bit, and I've jumped right into that. Okay, I shouldn't be bashing my head around this, but the thing that's kind of ingenious about these guys is that they do walk, or run, I guess, like 1% faster than you. So you really can't just keep them in a equilibrium indefinitely. They are going to pass you and catch up to you and obviously do damage to you. And by do damage, I mean kill you. It's been a while. I've been playing a lot of Blood Bowl. Also, visual style. I mean, that's obviously something I should have brought up earlier. It's a gimmick as well. Kind of like monochromatic, but with red. You know, what's black, white, and red all over? Well, Circa Infinity, now available on Steam. But I think that's a strong asset in games like this. I think the game looks, these are like Sonic the Hedgehogs, but inverse and also in the air. I think the game looks fine. I'm pretty much used to it at this point that most of these games that are worth their salt don't look generic. And the game definitely doesn't look generic. It looks a little bit like Closure, but I guess what I'm thinking more is like most of these games, you know, VVV has its own unique style. Super Meat Boy has its own unique style. 140, which is a game that came out like a little bit over 2 years ago, I think, was another minimalistic, oh, those guys just don't move at all. Another minimalistic, quote-unquote puzzle platformer. But it's not, oh god, I'm tilting hard here. There, we got all the way back to the checkpoint. It had its own unique visual style, so it's pretty much just par for the course for games like these. Not that the visual style deserves any less respect as a result. We need to go in the other direction there, don't be an idiot. Okay, so jump, get these guys oriented properly. There we go. That's the way we want to do it. And now they'll start mixing in elements of the earlier enemies, and that's a checkpoint for us. And they usually get, it's another interesting, and by interesting, I kind of mean ingenious without being like overly dramatic here, element of the design is that as you get more into the interior of these circles, the levels become harder and harder. It's kind of like, it's probably a little bit inaccurate to say that it's self-balancing in that regard, but you know what I mean by that is rarely are you going to encounter the hardest level on the first one in from a checkpoint. It increments in a very positive way. So if you want to play the Northern Lion drinking game for this episode, just take a shot every time I say increments. Apparently I'm a huge fan of that in this game. Let's play a couple more levels here. I had a feeling this would be a little bit more of a shorter let's look at, because, you know, games like this, there's not a ton of time that I can spend, you know, farting around in the options menu or looking at the campaign and being like, well, here's how the story is told, you know, like it doesn't really work like that. What you see is more or less what you get here. I mean, I don't think it's going to take a left turn out of nowhere and become like Max Payne 3 or something like that, where you're going to be, you know, it's a cover-based shooter or something. But I still think that, you know, there's a little bit more than meets the eye to this, even though I literally did just say what you see is what you get. Oh, stop running! I'm trying to think for a second. It's hard to capture the actual, like, without just shouting and being like, my brain's broken! It's hard to capture what makes this such an enjoyable game. It's mostly in the game feel there, which I'm not necessarily doing a fantastic job of conveying, as I focus 999% of my brain power on actually just beating the levels here. You know, you can either be good at the game, or you can, you know, accurately capture the game feel while you're playing, I suppose. This should work. I had faith that would work. These levels are becoming more difficult. These are levels I've never seen before. That is not the right direction. So we want to go to the right when we go down here. And then we want to jump in between these guys on occasion. Oh, God. We've got like a concentric clock problem here. Oh, we can just make it. Okay, there we go. Cheat the system a little bit. Now this one we have to go left, but at the same oh no, I'm tilting again. We're back to the checkpoint. Okay. Go right and jump. Are you kidding me? You got me on that one? I mean, I guess we didn't lose any progress, but... There we go. Snuck through there. Ooh, we made it. Okay, now this one we want to go to the right for sure. Yeah, that one was not so bad. Let's do one more level here, and then we'll probably call it. And my, you know, ultimate terminal decision, should you buy this game, should you not buy this game? Definitely, I would stop short of saying this is a must-buy. But if you're the kind of person who is interested in games like Super Hexagon, Duet if you played it, Pivot if you played it, you know, there's a lot of games that, oh god, that kind of pull from the same framework here. I've tilted again, and we're back at level 0. You should consider giving it a try. I do think it's a little bit of a premium price point, but that is kind of the new normal for indie games at the $10 tier there. That was very scary. It gets absurd very quickly. These guys are all facing the same direction, so we'll be able to sneak by there and hit the checkpoint. Good. Definitely the kind of thing that you should pay attention to if it pops up in a sale as well, because if your principal reason for not being super into this right now is the price, which I completely understand, you may have an opportunity to pick it up at a later time that's more conducive for you. It seems like it's good for a few hours of fun, you know, not the kind of thing that necessarily I think can become an obsession, but a temporary infatuation maybe. But again, it's the kind of thing that's not for everybody. If you're not into these, like, quote-unquote tough-as-nails platformers, which is a term that I hate to use but use all the time anyway, because secretly I love to use it because it makes my job easier. Wow, that's bad. And that's even worse. Sometimes I do get flipped around, like I go in the wrong direction with the radial controls. But I think that's kind of working as intended, if that makes sense. I think it's not that the controls are bad, or even that they're confusing, it's that they're intentionally kind of, like... abnormal for a platformer, let's put it that way. Like, you do just hit right to go right, but you're mostly not used to navigating around in a circle like this. Good jump. Okay. We're gonna do a little jump just to set this up. And I really thought I could make it, but I needed to get a little closer to the center of the circle there. Okay, we can make this one for sure. And then we'll set up a tiny jump, and then go. There we go. That one's gonna work, and we hit another checkpoint. But yeah, you get the idea. I think I've... wow, those guys are fast. I think I've more or less adequately explained myself. And you'll have the opportunity to make your own decision as a result. I have never seen the Stonehenge enemy before. Oh god, they're tilt inducers. We're going too far back. I think we made it back to the checkpoint already. They're not that fast, actually. As long as we go as soon as we drop. So we're going right. Yeah, as long as we go as soon as we drop, we should be fine. What about this one? We're going... Oh, they came back for me! Oh, no. Okay. This is capturing the game feel here, where you're like, shit, you got me. Oh, my God. Yeah, there's no time to think. And the other thing I'll say in my own defense is that it's harder than it looks. We want to go left here. Oh! Oh, we made it. Okay, what about these guys? Oh, these guys, they come after us from the astral plane. All right. Very impressive that this is a one-dude joint as well. That's pretty absurd, I think. You know, not that it has an astronomical amount of, like, 3D rendered assets or anything like that. I'm just saying, it's a very successful game for a single-person team, plus whoever did the sound design. But anyway, I don't want to... It's an integral part of the game. This is Circa Infinity. It's $10 on Steam. Your mileage may vary at that price point, but I think this is a really fun game. I'm having a good time with it. I probably will not finish it, but I've enjoyed the, you know, hour plus at this point that I've spent with it so far. If you want to pick it up on Steam, you can look in the video description below for a link there that'll take you to the Steam store page. For now, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, click the like button. It helps out a great deal. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more in the future. I'll be back later. See ya, Space Cowboys.